Hey guys, my name is Dustin Cruz. I'm on the content team here at Chief Architect, and today we're going to be talking about material properties. How to adjust them, how to place them, what you could do with them, what are the capabilities of materials. And I'm pretty excited because this is kind of my favorite area of Chief. I enjoy working with materials, making them, seeing what they can do, what their capabilities are, what the limitations are. And yeah, let's take a look. So, before we start messing around with materials, I just wanted to touch on what a material actually is. A material is a collection of settings and external maps that try to represent a actual real life substance over the top of a 3D object. And that sounds complex, but the common conception of a material is that it's just a picture that we're going to wrap around a 3D object to make it look like something, make it look like stone or wood or granite, when really what we have is three separate categories. We have, of course, the external maps, which would be your texture, any sort of maps you have that, and we'll touch on maps later, but right now just put all of your external maps in one category. We also have our patterns for vector works and line drawings. And we also have our render settings, our render properties. How shiny is something? Does it emit light? Is it made of metal? These are all things that are separate from the external maps and also separate from the patterns. So if you think of materials in these three categories, it will help you process what we're going to go through today. And also it will help you figure out how to adjust the materials on your own personalized materials later on, since you know if I want, different pattern lines, I had to worry about the pattern, and that won't affect my maps or my texture, and that won't affect my render properties. So, starting from the top, we're going to show how to place a material in the plan. So we have a nice kitchen here. We're going to go to our library, and you can just pick any material that you want and click on it. And you'll see a preview down here, and also a 3D preview right here. And if you can click on any surface in the 3D camera to apply that material onto that object. So we have a nice hex tile backsplash now. If I want to adjust these tiles, if I want to adjust any material, I click on my rainbow tool up here at the top. This is the Adjust Materials Definition tool. We're going to click on that, and that brings up our Define Materials dialog. From here, we have access to our pattern, which is one category, our texture, which is part of category 2, and our properties. These are our render properties. But let's go look at texture first. So, basic. There's a few things that most people do with materials when they start adjusting them, and that is to change the scale, the offset, and the rotation. Our scale is right here. This is our X scale and Y scale. If I check this at 40, because retain aspect ratio is checked on, this will change my Y scale to make sure they stay locked in the same aspect ratio. You'll see my tiles get bigger. If I go down to 10, they'll go small. So you can change the scale however you want. Let's go back up to 25. All right. And also we can offset. Offset just shifts the image left or right. Because this is a seamless tile hex texture, it's not a great example. It's kind of hard to describe this with this hex texture, so let's exit out of that. I'm going to show you how to paint a material with the eyedropper tool up here. You're going to click on the eyedrop tool. Let's put that stone face back on it, the stone countertop. We're going to click it once to load up the eyedropper, and then we're going to paint it wherever we want. And that gives us our material back. We're going to take our rainbow adjust material definition tool, click on that to open it up. And now we have a better example to mess with our offsets. Go back to texture. Our offset, let's make it 5. And you'll see it start to shift around. Let's change our vertical to 5. It'll pop up 5 inches. So pretty easy to understand. Also, we have an angle here. We can rotate that. So let's do 45. You'll see here, this is a sample of the texture. This is just a 3D example. You saw it shift 45 degrees. Let's go 90. Let's go 15. So you can rotate, you can offset, and you can scale. And that's a pretty simple example of what's going on with the most basic of material editing. Let's also put that hex back on. One more simple thing that a lot of people do is blends. So we have a nice hex tile put back on the backsplash. If I want to change that color, this sample is the same exact material, only blended. So I blended it a blue-green. And the way I did that, let's open it back up, is with our material color, blend with texture. If I uncheck that, it goes back to normal. If I check that, that activates my color picker. I can then change it however I want. If I just want like a darker gray, hit OK. that'll change. If I want to have a deep red, just like that. So we covered placing a material and adjusting it, and we also covered blending. These are the meat and potatoes. These are the most common things that you will do with a material in Chief. Everything after this is kind of a custom job. Things you won't do very often. Like I said, most of the time you're just going to be doing this. Pretty cut and dry. So let's move on to something a little bit more complex, patterns. All right, let's touch on patterns real quick. A lot of people want to have patterns for different rendering techniques such as vector or watercolor. If I swap my rendering techniques down to vector here, you can see all of these are patterns. And so let's talk about how to adjust these briefly. Let's put on an example right here. And let's open it up with the same rainbow tool to get to our define materials. So here's our pattern. This is our texture slot. This preview is of the texture, the actual image that we have loaded right here. This pattern is just the vector pattern, and you can swap back and forth here to see that these are indeed in sync. These are lined up quite well, and most materials, if not all of them, hopefully, you get from the Chief Architect libraries, such as our bonus catalogs or core library, will have your patterns already set. And so if you want to adjust your texture and make it larger or smaller or rotate, you don't have to worry about your patterns, because this right here, keep pattern texture in sync. If I rotate this 45 degrees, it will rotate my texture with it. Let's go back to my pattern real quick, and let's look back at our vector preview. You can change your patterns here. You can pick different kinds. Let's go back to our hexagon. You can change the scale, which is how wide they are. You can change the horizontal offset, vertical offset, and angle, just like texture. And if this is checked, that will also rotate your texture back and forth. Real quick, I wanted to mention here, look at this 90 degrees angle. This is 90 degrees. If we go to our texture, this is 0. So what's going on here is that when we loaded this, let's uncheck this so we can desync them. Let's make this 0. This is how our hexes came in. If we look at our texture, you can see that the point is up and down. The flat edge is left and right. So for our texture to match, we needed to rotate it. Let's go back to vector to take a look. We want to rotate it 90 degrees. This is unchecked. Let's make it 90. And now when we go back, our flat edges are on the left and right sides. We're synced up again. Let's check that. So we're locked in now. Now if I change this angle to 0, they are still in sync. The only confusing part is if you go back to texture, where this was 0, it's now negative 90. So don't be afraid if your numbers start shifting around on you. Your pattern and your texture are separate. Once they are made correctly, you can lock them in place with this checkbox. So to get the scale correct, the easiest method is this pattern from texture right here. We could go through and pick our own categories here. We can open the library and pick up more patterns in our library and adjust them, but that means a lot of counting. Like say we're doing siding, we have to go through and count how many siding boards are on the image, how many tiles across is the image, and then mess with the width here to get it to match just right. It's somewhat time consuming and it's not very fun. Instead, much more fun is the pattern from texture. We're going to click that and it's going to show our original image. This is our texture, and this is our output image. This is the pattern we're going to derive from this texture. This will add or remove some lines. If I come in here, see I got a little bit of noise in here. If I increase this, it'll decrease the noise until I'm happy with where it's at. If I hit OK, let's go back to look at our vector. You can see that it's not as clean as if I had just picked our hex, but it was fast. It was much, much faster. And so let's do it again. If I do pattern from texture, hit OK, it's not as clean, but if I'm back here, it doesn't make that big of a difference. All right, patterns. Moving on. Okay, let's take a look at our third leg here, material properties. And because material properties, there's a lot of stuff that you can only see with a ray trace. We're going to skip ahead and just show some renders. Just wanted to real quick point out here that we have our properties on the left, we have our general materials, and these are our material properties. If your material class changes, let's say translucent, you'll get translucency. If you change to mirror, reflection. So some of these are in different places, but more times than not, general material is the place we want to be. And let's take a look at what we got, and then we'll come back and mess with this stained concrete. Diffuse. So the diffuse slider in Chief, all it does is control how much of the texture is showing in the material. If I bring this down, you'll see it turn to black. That's just showing how much of this texture is coming through in the material. So pretty simple. I don't mess with it very often, but I just wanted to mention it because it's there. Specular. Let's take a look at roughness real quick. It's kind of the same thing. So if you look on the left here, this ball is nice and shiny. This ball is nice and rough. The more you increase roughness in an object, the less shiny it's going to be. So this is a shiny object, so our roughness should be somewhat low at 10%. If we want to make this a more roughed up version, we can bring it up to, let's say, 58. Hit OK. And it looks more matte, more scratched up, more rough. Let's take it back down to 10. And let's go back to our example. Oops. Specular is kind of the same thing, but only applies to ray trace views currently. If you are doing a ray trace and something doesn't look quite right, maybe it's too rough, too shiny, something's wrong, you can fiddle with your specular sliders. They won't show up in PBR or standard view though. So just to let you know, let's go over to emissive. Emissive is fun because it looks like it's emitting light. Fun fact, it's not actually emitting light, so if you put an emissive material on a light bulb or a TV screen or a microwave clock or something, it will look like it's lighting up, but it won't actually cast any light. So if you want to cast light, like up here, you'll need a light source. But it will look like it's casting light. So let's go back to our properties. We'll go to our emissivity, and you can make it brighten up. Can't really tell that much here. Let's go a little bit brighter. You can see now it's starting to look like a light bulb or a lamp. If you go way high, it's pretty impressive. So we've got the sun here, and if we go hit OK, we have an awesome view. So good for fireplaces. You don't usually go that hot because it makes everything look weird, but you can. I just like doing that because it's cool looking. Let's bring it back down to a normal 0. Okay, let's talk about transparency real quick. Transparency is a little bit tricky because something looks transparent, that's fine, but this looks like it's a ghost. It doesn't look like it's made out of glass. We want our transparencies to behave how they do in the real world. If I drag the slider up, you can see I start to fade away, and that's gone. Same with standard view. Let's go to standard. Transparency makes it disappear, makes it come back. PBR. If you need glass, if you need something that looks like glass, what you're after is refractivity, and that only really works in ray trace. So you can see here this is a glass shell ball. This one is full of glass. If you want light to refract, bend as it travels through this material, you need to ray trace it. And more than that, let's go back. It's still set as emissive. Let's make that back to 0. If you want to make something refract, this will just make it see-through. It won't actually refract it, even in ray trace. What you need is to change the material class down to transparent. And then we have our index of refraction. I just leave that as crown glass. This, when you ray trace it, will look like this. So if you have a glass figurine, if you have glass plates, windows, chandeliers, and they are looking ghost-like, you want them to look like glass, you need to set the material class. One more time. Let's go back here to general material. This says transparent. That's not the good one. Go down on your material class down to transparent, and this, just having that set, will then make it look like real glass in ray trace, not PBR or standard. Okay? Let's go back to our general material. I just wanted to hit this one metallic checkbox. This will make our material look metallic. So that's how we get our steel, our copper, everything else. So metal is a really good example of how you don't need to have a pattern, you don't need to have a texture or maps, and you can still get materials just with using what you have in Chief already. This is a bronze. Let's go back up here to general material. Let's make this metallic. We've got the same bronze. If I change the color of this metal, let's go to a white. I get more of a stainless steel titanium look. Let's go a little bit darker than that so it's easier to see. There we go. If I hit OK, this changes. And that's fantastic. I don't need to have a material that says this is metallic or this looks like this. If I wanted to have this backsplash just be white, clean slate, I can go through here and take off the texture. I can change my pattern color to white and hit OK. It looks pretty good. So materials are pretty easy to make and adjust. I just wanted to show this because a lot of people think you have to have a texture, even if it's just a white texture. If I go in here, open this up, people will go into the texture slot and just load a white image. You don't need it. Okay, you don't have to have it. It doesn't require a pattern. There's no pattern assigned right now. You can do a lot of things with just material properties. If I wanted to rough that up, go back to our properties. Let's make it 60. Not so bad. Let's make it black. Having darker materials shows reflection better, so it gives you more of a highlight. There we go. Okay, material properties, that's the flyby. Let's import one of our own, see what we can do with it. Okay, we talked about patterns, we talked about material properties. Let's close that. Let's go and make our own. So here's just an empty material. If I open this up, there's nothing loaded, there's no texture. Default properties, texture is nothing, there's no maps involved, there's no pattern. It's the same thing as going here, right clicking, going to new, material. Let's say import example. Hit OK. Same thing. So first things first, if we wanted to make a backsplash tile, we need a source image, and there's lots of places you can get them, but let's just take the most basic example. Let's open up Google here, and I've entered backsplash tile, and we need to go through and find a good quality image for backsplash tile. This would not work out because it is angled. We need a straight shot. This would not work out because it has a bowl of fruit, a lot of stuff obscuring our tile. This might work out if we can get a good shot of this, but there's some shadow underneath here as well that might cause some issues. So this is what we're looking for. These kinds of images where it's straight, there's not a whole scene around it, so like this would be a bad example, this would be a bad example, this would be a great example. So here's another one that's pretty good, but it's angled, so it won't look right. Because what's going to happen is we're going to take a snippet of this screen and we're going to tile it across. So wherever this edge is going to be where our seam shows up. So that's a pretty good one. Let's try that one. Also, if you look down here, we have our resolution size. So the bigger the better. You don't really need like 4K or anything, but 1024, 2000, that's a pretty good count. Actually, that's a little bit small, 522 by 548. That will work fine, but let's do something a little bit more exciting. That's about right, 1000, 1020. Let's do this one. So we need to first open it. We're going to copy the image address. Let's take a look at the full-sized image, okay? And you can either save it as is and put that in there, but we're going to take a snippet because we don't want this empty edge here. Usually when they show tile previews, they're going to show how it comes from the manufacturer with these chunks missing. So, also we don't want this text right here. So we're going to take our snippet tool, which is right down here. Any way you can get the image is fine. And just grab a good square. We don't want to get, so down here, this part right here is kind of cut in half, so we don't want to get all that. Let's go right to that edge. And it might take a little bit of practice, but We've got a pretty decent amount of tile here. We've got a pretty good cut. Let's see how it looks. So we're going to save it. Go to the desktop. Let's do tile example. Go back to Chief. And let's just open this up here. We're going to our texture. We're going to browse back to our desktop. Oops, desktop. We have tile, tile, tile example. And already you can see our texture start to change. It doesn't look too bad. Let's mess with our render properties a little bit. Let's make it a little bit shiny because it's glass. And let's change the scale of the texture. Let's make it 30 by 52. 30 by 32. This is retain aspect ratio is checked. So if I change this to 30, up here this will change to 28. That'll work. Let's hit OK. See how it looks. So not bad. For 10 seconds worth of work, we've got a decent representation of our tile. We can go in here. Let's say we wanted to have a pattern. Because this, let's change this preview to a cube. These blank tiles, these kind of smooth tiles will probably give you a decent pattern, but these detailed textured tiles will probably be a problem child for the texture generator. But let's try it anyway, see how it goes. Pattern from texture, yeah. Let's scale this up to get all of our tiles in there. And you can see that to get all the lines for all the tiles that we need, we're going to get a lot of these lines. Let's call it good. Let's try it out. And let's take a look at it in vector. Not bad. It's 1-to-1, so we're right on the money there. Doesn't look too bad. Let's go back to PBR. Let's shine it up a little bit more because it's glass. It's not all the way. Let's do 5%. Hit OK. Not bad. So, you might have noticed that there's a seam right here where the edge of our tile is. So most of these tiles are offset, so they wouldn't actually lay down flat like this. You get this straight shot all the way up. It looks pretty good. Most people won't notice it, but if it drives you nuts, you can look for seamless textures. When you do your Google searches, seamless is the keyword because that takes the seam out of your tile. We do it for you here at Chief, and also if you want to make your own textures, there's a lot of resources on the website. On Chief Talk, we've got one where you can make your own textures that has maps. I'm not going to cover maps so much right now because it's kind of a deep well, but let's put a hex back on there. And you can see how the light is broken up here in the grout lines. It's not a straight mirror like it is with our texture. I'm just hitting undo. So you can see that the grout, there's no depth to the tile. The way you do that is maps. So just like our texture, we have slots everywhere for maps here. Here's our texture slot. That's our image. Down here where it says bump, normal, these are the ones that give us some 3D extrusion, some 3D depth. AO maps will help us with our shadows, so it looks like it's got some shadows in between the cracks of the tile. Roughness, metal. We can have metal in different spots. So let's say some of these tiles are metal. They would look correct. If I clicked metallic, the entire thing would look metallic, and that'd be incorrect. Let's say we just wanted these dark gray tiles to be metallic. We could accomplish that with a metal map. These are more advanced properties, and you can learn how to make your own in Chief Talk. We've got a couple generators for you, especially for tile and for flooring. But I've got an example here. I just wanted to show you what they're doing bit by bit, and this will be the last thing we show today before we do questions. Okay, so that's the basic way to make materials. There's more advanced materials out there, mostly from our bonus catalogs. These come already pre-made. Here's some examples that take advantage of advanced mapping. There's a video that we'll link to in the description that will help you understand what's going on. But to get this kind of 3D look, these are still 2D materials, but by using advanced mapping techniques, we can get a 3D look to them. So you can see how the light, the reflection kind of changes. It doesn't show up over the grout. The grout looks rough and deep. Our metals look like they have ridges. There's a little bit of grime and dirt on there. It breaks up the reflection pretty good. Let's do one more example here. It's a nice matte, kind of a clay finish with little cracks and debris inside there. I'm not going to go super deep into this. Here's just a rundown of what maps are doing what. This is our texture map. If I open this up, and it's not too impressive yet, but it'll look better as I go. If I open this up under texture, it's just got a texture map right here. It's going to be a metal and glass tile. There's nothing else here in the bumper normal. We're going to add the metal map, and all that's doing is telling Chief which part of the material I want to look like metal. So if I open this back up, you'll see over in properties, there's a metal map installed right there. So this is going to be glass. I don't want it to be metallic, but everything else around it will be metallic. Still looks a little bit flat though. We're going to change the roughness. So because this center diamond is going to be glass, outside is going to be metal, I want the metal to be a little bit more rough than the glass. Apply that on there. So you can see the clean reflection here in the green. If I move the camera, you'll see it start to diffuse out. So now I have a roughness map telling the material I want this part to be rougher, I want this part to be smoother, and that's what a roughness map is doing. Here's a normal map. That's going to give us our 3D depth, and that adds our creases and our cracks. You can use it for all kinds of detail, but we still have a little bit of light coming in here in these cracks. It should not be evenly lit, and so we use an AO map to tell Chief where we want shadows to show up. And then we have more realistic shadows. I'll run through them one more time and not talk, just so you can see what's doing what. Texture, metal, roughness, normal, ambient, occlusion. All right, so that just shows what you can do with advanced mapping. For beginners, for starters, I recommend just taking snippets off the internet. It looks good, it looks clean, it conveys what the space will look like. When you want to dig deeper and get really into material properties, we have videos available. We have a Chief Talk thread going in the symbols and content section, or you can just email me. I'm at dustin@chiefarchitect.com. I love to talk about material properties. I love to see what you guys do with the tools we offer. If you have any questions, don't be shy. We're here to help. And that about does it for my presentation. I hope you learned a lot today, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.